I'm so happy to welcome Mel Venner to the Glasshouse Podcast. So I'm going to read what is said on her LinkedIn. There's a lot. So it's Chartered MCIPD, and she is the director in Instinct Performance. Did I make a hames of that, Mel? Was that okay?
That's it. Thank you so much for having me, Siobhan. That's it. That's me. Just Mel.
That's you. That's it. Just Mel.
Yeah.
It sounds like a sitcom. So tell me what the Chartered MCIPD stands for.
So that means that I'm a chartered member of the CIPD, and the CIPD is the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. So they deal with HR qualifications, learning and development qualifications, organisational development. So
you know what you're talking about, is what you're telling me.
The letters would suggest so. No, I do. I geek out about this stuff. So anything to do with people development or organisations and performance, that's my jam.
I love it. And so I mentioned that you are the director of Instinct Performance. Tell people a little bit about that.
So Instinct, as the name suggests, is it's a performance consultancy with a twist, and it's based a lot on neuroscience, behavioural science, and how we can turn performance into instinct, stuff that you sort of can sharpen and kicks in when you need it. So it goes a little bit further than training, which is great when you're in the comfy, little classroom setting, but this is about, how do you change behaviour? So that's Instinct, and looking at sales, leadership, training people to deliver training internally, and diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, we spoke about it the other day, I suppose, for full disclosure. So myself and Mel had an initial call, and it was nearly longer than this podcast is going to be because we just got totally nerded out on everything. But I wanted to ask you something. So the way I try and run the Glasshouse is I try and have people who know more than me. So I'm going to ask questions that I know people who are listening are going to ask, okay? And a lot of the people that I would coach or train have things like imposter syndrome, where they don't know that they're going to, if they're going to be able to take on a leadership role. So let me ask you this, because you have the MCIPD. Can anyone train to be a leader, or can they develop the skills to be a leader, or do you have to be born with it?
No, you can absolutely train to be a leader. So everyone has strengths and weaknesses. Mm-hmm. So I basically developed, it was like a matrix to help people think about the different kinds of leader. And there are people who are very good at relationships, and there are people who are very good with the stats and the numbers. And there are people who are really good at thinking longer term about implications, and there are people who are like, what's happening right now? So everyone's good at some aspect of leadership. It's then just a case of figuring out, how do you play to those strengths, and what are the bits that are maybe not your strongest suit, and how can we give you tools to bolster those areas to round you out? But everyone has an element of leadership.
No, well, look, I love that because it's super positive. But say, for example, even what you just explained there, I would have the human side of it. The stats would bring me out in a rash. And then I automatically was like, no, I feel itchy. And I'm very good. I read a book the other day on Ignite and, all of this, with ideas and innovation or something. Right, but yeah. It's the investigation part, getting into the details, which would just drive me insane. So yeah. I would be good with the relationship part and shorter term goals. So I'll be like, yeah, let's do this, blah, blah, blah. But if something is longer term, I have a tendency, I'm working on it, but to lose interest, because I need that instant results. In that, do you ever see that test that they do with children? If they're going to eat the marshmallow, oh yeah, I would be gone.
Yeah, but like that's human nature. So I think we just like don't beat yourself up about it, because then there are other people who like give them a spreadsheet and they're happy. They're like a pig in muck, but then like if they have to deal with the human stuff, they're in the rash. So it's then about what systems and processes can you put in place to make that stuff more bearable. So like, is there like an automation? Is there a bit of kit technology that can help with it? Is there something we can do in terms of understanding how you learn, so that maybe it's all happening like a little bit at a time, or do you need to block time out? So it is about systems and processes to like almost like give you what you don't have naturally, to like complement where your strengths lie, because let's be honest, no one likes doing things that they're not very good at. And like if you force yourself to do it all of the time, then you're miserable. And we know, well, I say we know, there's a lot of science, neuroscience, to suggest that actually then affects your problem solving ability, it affects your memory and your concentration. So like spending as much time in your happy place as possible is what we want to do, and then like get some cheats, some little cheat sheets and things to help out where we know we need that help.
So anybody listening to this, I'm probably going to do it as well, because I know obviously with your company, could somebody like me or somebody who's considering, you know, a leadership role or anything, any of the, like, you know, the offers that you have or the services that you have, can they reach out as individuals to you within your company and I suppose retain you to support?
Yeah. So the sales and the leadership services in particular have prices for individuals, for small businesses. So if there's maybe like 3 of you that are like, oh, we could do with this, is priced separately to, you know, 10 to 20 heads plus. So
yeah.
Definitely that there are courses that look at specific things as well. So
okay, well, I'll make sure to share that when we eventually put this podcast out. We'll be out this week. One of the things that really interested me when we were speaking the last day, and it was like, I'm Nikki, your face lights up anyway, but when we were speaking and we spoke about like diversity, equity and inclusion, it was like another page, and you'd shared something on your LinkedIn profile. Do you remember what we were talking about? It was about taking the emotional out of conversations.
Yeah, so it's, everyone's got an opinion on this, and whether or not I'm flipping sick of hearing about it, let's stop talking about it, the PC brigade's gone mad, snowflakes just need to get over it, or you feel very passionately that not enough is being done to address the real issues, people are having very lively, passionate debates about it, and what's happening is we're getting trapped in this emotional state where we feel how we feel, and you're either angry, upset, frustrated, and what we're not focusing on is how to move that conversation out of the emotions, which are completely valid and just make sense, but we're not then moving that conversation into a rational, logical, solution based state where we can actually hear what the other person is saying and move the needle. And it's really frustrating. The D&I side of my business was not something that I intended on moving into, but I felt compelled because I could just see the holes in the discussion that's happening at the moment, where I can see we're not talking about the things that we should actually be talking about, and we're not approaching it in the way that I know influences behavior. That's my thing, remember, is about like behavioral science and stuff. So I'm like, we're never gonna get people on board if people feel forced to have this conversation in a particular way. So Yeah, that's it's bringing me a lot of it's very rewarding to get involved in the work in this way and help people navigate this, because it's scary.
Well, I think that even the fact that you're and that's what I love like about your LinkedIn profile and like what you're doing and what you're trying to do is to, I mean, again, I don't even want to sound like a snowflake saying a safe space, but there's so many companies that I would deal with that want to make diverse hires or want to make their workplace more equitable. And even in Ireland, a lot of the businesses are run by white males, you know, and they want to have the conversation. They think that they're open, and you know that they don't feel that they're blocking people from different backgrounds from applying, but that's because they only have their lens to see through. And I think that they're being, and I can understand it, being put off a little bit, like, you know, because it's, you know, how do they approach it? And then what if they make a mistake? And then, so it's like you had done this the other day where they just like completely turn this way and
People
steer
are
away.
terrified to death of being cancelled, or like having the best of intentions and it just be jumped on, whether it's cancel culture by social media, or if you say something and you know, the language being used, you are racist, you are sexist, very inflammatory, you know.
Yeah.
It's emotional to be called out.
Of course.
So, you know, when the stakes are that high, when you know, you could say something on this, but if you do, there's a chance that your reputation will be damaged, or you're going to get dragged into a space that you're not 100% comfortable in or confident in, like you're not really sure how to ask the question. It's just way easier to turn the other way, deal with what we know, let's just keep doing this is all going to blow over,
everything's grand.
And you can't, you know, it's not the right thing to do, but I don't blame people for feeling that way, because you know, it's, as I say, people are hot on this. And my very much pragmatic view of it is, we have to be able to, first of all, talk about this in a way that everybody's voice feels heard, and that everybody feels as though they can voice their legitimate concerns and ask their legitimate questions in a way that's not going to get them, you know, people baying for their blood. Like, we have to start there, because if we're not being honest with each other and ourselves, or we're being super guarded, or there are things that we can't actually talk about and are taboo, and let's just keep it to these safe, you know, things over here, again, it's paying lip service. We're not doing the work that needs to be done. So what we have to remember is we've got to bring people on this journey, and that means, you know, people are rightly so terrified of getting this wrong, and sometimes it's easier to do nothing than to risk doing the wrong thing.
And so what would you say then to, because I know that it's hard enough to have these conversations like in your family, you know, or with your friends. I mean, like I was saying to you, I'm Irish Algerian, and I would hear someone, they would feel more comfortable maybe saying a racist joke or something like that was not PC. It was a racist joke, but you couldn't even say that was a racist joke, because then they'd get their back up. And so it was harder having those conversations even in a social setting. So then when it comes into the workplace, one, I want to ask you, what do you think of leadership, and I mean leadership by, you know, the C-suite and the decision makers? What do you think that their role is in this?
So I think, first of all, it's education, because like you said before, privilege is blind, and privilege became like a hot word. Like, heaven forbid you get accused of having any level of privilege. Like, if you don't know how hard I've had it, what privilege have I got? So I'm careful around this word, but privilege is blind in that, for all of the you know, struggles and challenges you have, unless you have a lived experience, you don't really have an understanding. So education has to be there for leaders to understand and appreciate the scope of what we're actually talking about. And what we're talking about essentially isn't it isn't about protected characteristics even. It's not about race or gender or, sexual orientation. It's about how do you create a really inclusive environment which has elements of psychological safety, people feel comfortable bringing their whole authentic selves to work, people are able to challenge people's ideas if they think they've got a better one, or to call people out for things and hold people accountable. That's just like a healthy...
It's not very regular though, because I'm thinking of some of the companies that I know, and even if you look at it, like you said, like the culture of safety, if I think of some of, like, not even companies I've worked with, but like companies I know of, it's very hierarchical. I don't know if I worded that word, but it's very much not, that you go in and say, well, I feel safe. And that's like, or that's my idea, or that was, or maybe
This is where the tools come in, practical tools, because it's all very well having the theory and going, I'll
on your
listen,
website.
I'll hear you out. Yeah, no, we've got an open door policy here. Feel free to call me out. And like, so
it's not true,
one of the workshops that I run is how to challenge and then how to be challenged. And a lot of the work I'm doing with businesses now is then, okay, so now we've got the education and everyone's on board and everyone's got these tools. How do we integrate that into everything? Like, how do we integrate that into your onboarding process, your monthly one-to-ones, your incentives, your promotions, your disciplinaries? Like, how do we integrate this into the way that business is ran? Like, what conversations are we having with people if we're not talking about what's important to them, getting feedback, two-way feedback? Because a lot of the time in these hierarchical structures, you get feedback from your manager about how you're performing, but there's not often an opportunity for you to give feedback about the business and how they felt, and actually you weren't there for me this month, or
that was one of the good things that I think they introduced in my previous company. I'm like towards the end of my tenure there, and it was, when you go and get your one-to-one or your yearly review or whatever it was, they gave an option then of where the person could give, or the employee, not the manager, could give feedback on their experience, and what their challenges were, but it wasn't I don't think visible to the manager. So if they felt that something was, relatively unfair, or, didn't enjoy the experience, sometimes it's very hard to say that, as you said, like challenging somebody. They took that out, so there was like a blind response, to say, okay.
So one of the things that I've suggested in other businesses is I would always be really fascinated, because I'm still a scientist at heart, right? So I'm fascinated with giving people the option to do it face to face, and then also having an option to do it anonymously, and seeing, is there a disparity between what you're seeing? Because actually, if you've got a situation where face to face everything's great, or I've got no feedback, but actually then you've got stuff coming out anonymously where there are no consequences, then that says to me that actually the issue is like that in terms of communication and the culture within the business, there's a greater problem, because every person should feel able, and should is the key word here. Tools are one part, that's like the skill gap, but then there's like the confidence and knowing there's going to be no repercussions and stuff. This happens over time. But everyone should be trying at least, or be on their way to building that culture where you can feel confident and have the tools to bring things to your manager, and your manager should also have those tools to know how to receive that without ego, to hear what it is, and to be solution led. So this is very relevant, as I say, not just to D&I, just good business practice in general, because this is, if you don't feel comfortable telling your manager when things are wrong, quite often the first time they know about that is when the notice goes in, I'm leaving, I'm not happy, and they were never really given an opportunity to fix that, or to look at, what can be done before it gets to that point. So if someone's unhappy to the point that they want to leave, we've definitely passed the threshold where they're at peak performance and happy and buzzing and motivated. So this all leads back. I mean, people ask me, what do these 4 parts of your business have to do? You know, how do they relate to each other? I'm like, well, they're all integral to creating a high performance culture. Like all of them. Like you can't have
one without the other. Yeah.
Unless you're thinking about all of these things together.
And what's like, so I know like a lot of companies would probably say, well, maybe that's for the enterprise size companies, you know, they have the time to, I feel like that you've heard that before. Like, it sounds to me that it's relevant for any company size. I have another question as well I want to ask you, but I'll get your feedback on that. So do you think this is suitable for any size company?
Any size company, but I would say in particular, probably even more so, if you're starting out and you're a scale-up business, getting this stuff right from the off and baking that into your framework that you're going to be building on and scaling out is massive, because there's going to become a point in your business where you can't touch everything all of the time. And to be fair, I think this is something I'm seeing a lot with the, you know, smaller scale up businesses is that understanding that if you are touching everything all the time, you're actually the bottleneck in the business. You're actually the limiting factor, because you only know what you know. You're not actually then getting the benefit of people who might have a different approach to things or know something, a new way, a better way of doing something. So I would say
I love that, a bottleneck.
More important at that stage, because the impact that you have in a smaller business like is seismic. You know, it really does. You can feel the impact of it pretty much straight away because of the size of the business. So I hear that all of the time. When we get bigger, that's gonna, you know, be a problem. But I'm thinking about, you know, that's an extremely short-sighted view, and I think having these structures and having these things, having the tools to be able to talk to your staff in a way where they feel like they can open up about mental health, they can talk about the things that are important to them outside of work. If people don't see the straight line between that and like a high growth business,
part of your strategy, really.
Yeah, exactly. It should be.
Yeah. And so I was going to ask you this question as well, but I have to be careful how I word it. So, okay.
Oh dear.
No, it's not. I just don't want to be tripping over it. But a lot of people say that the culture of the company comes from the top, right? So it comes from the founder, the CEO, what have you. That's really the culture, and they create the culture. But you've also heard the quote that people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. So I mean, like, I know people who've bought into the CEOs of the companies, and this is where you're saying that, like, if they have their hands on everything, eventually a CEO is going to have to release, you know, as you said, like the bottleneck, or like trying to control every side of it. What do you do then when you have the line managers or the managers that, even though there might be a process of, you know, trying to create a psychologically safe place and, you know, taking the ego out of it and learn, if they do all of these things, then what happens if you have like line managers or heads of department that just are, I don't want to say, well, let's just say they're old school, that they're just not buying into it? Because really the culture that an employee feels is the person that they're sitting beside, you know. So like, I could buy into the CEO or the CFO all I like, but if I'm sitting beside this like lunatic who's like angry all the time,
exactly. Does
that's
that reflect your reality? Does that reflect your day-to-day reality? So people who say that the culture comes from the top, it can be driven by the top, it can be influenced by the top, there can be input from the top. But are you honestly telling me that if the 5 people that I speak to most in the business are my manager and my 4 teammates who are all the same level as me, and they're hideous, they exclude me, and they have, you know, banter and stuff like that, are you honestly telling me that those 4 people who are the same level as me aren't eroding the culture? Like, what people get confused, people think culture is this like brand and marketing exercise that you can put onto your website in this really like swish way. and there's your culture. Your culture is the day-to-day actions of everybody. So it doesn't matter whether you're a trainee, you are contributing to the culture. And for me, the things that make or break a culture aren't the big events. It's the little things that happen,
like the microaggressions
under the radar. So if you think about things that make a culture, people might have, big fancy AGM, or, the big company holidays and stuff. That's great. But like in terms of, whether it's coffees for everyone, or, breakfast buddies on a Friday, or like the WhatsApp message from your boss on the weekend because they knew that you were moving house, to say that they hope everything goes well today. Like that WhatsApp message actually is probably more indicative of the culture. And on the flip side, something I talk a lot about is, one person getting punched in the face, and getting disciplined, in work does not a culture make. But, the locker room humor, or the person who consistently no shows to work, or comes in still drunk or hungover, or, the people that seem to get away with murder, that low level, oh, it's fine, it's just him, it's just her, don't worry about it. It's that stuff that's likely to erode away a culture much faster than, one big massive event. So it's just paying attention to, like, what are the little bits of litter, if you like, that are like cluttering up your culture, that actually one of them on their own is fine, but collectively, like, are obscuring and are in the way of the stuff that you're actually trying to do. And when you reframe it like that, like, it's not what you say, it is in your actions. You can't just say, I am an open-minded manager, you can tell me anything. I need to show you that. I need to show you that, it's safe to talk about certain things at work. I need to show you it's okay to fail. I need to encourage you to do that. I need to be in the trenches with you. So it's those sort of money can't buy, policy can't mandate things about people that make the culture. And you can have, like I say, not to take away from CEOs or people, directors that will be coming for my head, you absolutely can have frameworks, guidelines, processes. You can workshop this stuff, but ultimately it has to be executed by every single person who's in contact with your staff. Has to be.
So with that, because that's a lot, and I'm sure the CEOs won't be coming for your head, because I do think that, no, because I think it means everybody has to have a level of accountability in it. And one thing I would say to candidates or job seekers, or even clients when I'm talking to them, it's like I don't want to just know what the job is or what the CV is. I want to know how they did the job, and not like just the skills or their duties that they were assigned, but like, how are they as a colleague? Were they disrespectful to the cleaning lady, but then really nice to the CEO, or whatever it would be? Like, I try and get like an insight like that. But if you're talking about these people who are littering in the sense of culture, okay, how do you hire for people that aren't like that that want to build a great company culture? Like, how do you do that, keeping DEI in the back of your mind?
So behavioral interviewing is so important. It's not just about whether this person can come in and do the job. And when I think about ED&I always say, don't just hire for experience. Like, don't, like, people get blinded by, this person's done this before, so they'll be able to do it here. And it's like, well, don't hire for experience. What does this person actually be able to do, and hire for that? Because this new, view might actually shake things up. Me coming from neuroscience instead of HR meant that I could look at training and go, why are we doing this? So behavioral interviewing and understanding, this is why culture is so important in terms of actions, because it's, what does that look like? If part of your culture is that you are, you hear this, work hard, play hard, cool. What does that look like? And how would that be evidenced? And then really trying to find out from people, you know, if you ask them, would you be nice to the cleaning lady? They'll go, yeah, I love the cleaning lady. So it's really giving them scenarios and situations, asking them for examples, you know, and to a certain extent, you can do some situational interviewing as well, where, you know, they haven't got time to rehearse. You're actually seeing how they respond under pressure and their problem solving live. So there are loads of things that you can do so that people tell you who they really are, not who they want you to think that they are. And that's often missed, because I think especially in recruitment, but in businesses in general, they go, well, this person can do the job and I really like them because we support the same football team, or we
spoke about that.
Yeah.
So what would you do? Because we had spoken about it obviously in a previous call, but in like, so if you highlight, okay, doing the behavioral like type questions, so you get like more of a full picture of who the person is. What do you think about having, I'm a believer in this, but I would like your opinion, in having standardized questions. So it's not, you know, someone just like an interviewer goes in and is interviewing you and they have like a completely different conversation with you than they do with the next person or the next person. Do you believe that you should have pre-prepared questions for each stages of the interview process?
I do, to an extent, and let me tell you why. Because if you've got a transparent, completely objective, consistent set of criteria that everyone is being judged against, then the goalposts aren't being moved. There's no opportunity for the unconscious biases to come in, where actually we didn't really drill down into that, but it's okay because we got sidetracked talking about the stuff that we want to talk about. Everybody is being judged against the same criteria. And even if you smash it in one area, if you're weak on the others, it's going to show, and vice versa. So I think it helps maintain a level of objectivity during the selection process if at least everyone is being judged according to the same criteria.
Yeah,
that's
no,
not
100%.
to say there's not an opportunity, you know, to within those parameters, everyone's going to be judged. And actually, I just want to come back to this point that you made, so you can probe into that particular relationship with that particular person in more detail, but you have to do that with everybody. Then it's not just
that was my question. And some of the clients that I'd spoken to, so like I get what you mean, that it doesn't necessarily have to be standardized questions or you have to stick to a script, because maybe if they go off you could kind of dig in a little bit deeper. But in relation to, then some clients have said to me, well, how do we get like the right cultural fit? And at that point I launched myself through the window. No, so they said like, how do we get the right cultural fit? And my point is that you can still incorporate and pre-prepare, like as you said, that you want to drill down that it's like a work hard, play hard. How do we measure that? Right. So you measure that then in your questions.
My question to that would be, I would answer that question with a question. What do you mean by cultural fit? Yeah. What is the culture? Because if you can't tell me what the culture is and how that's evidenced and what that looks like, you know, again, you hear lots of people go, well, we need someone who's really resilient. You know, we're resilient.
Because we're going to beat you up day in, day out.
What does that actually look like? You're not going to know that. So if you're really not careful with culture fit, and culture fit is of course still important. Of course it is. Yeah. Of course it is. But if we're not clear on what we're talking about when we talk about culture fit, it can very easily become a cover for something else. And I think it's really, when you're talking about culture fit, if you're not 100% sure of what it is that what you mean, you end up with, and every recruiter knows this feedback, I can't quite put my finger on it, they're just not right, or there was another candidate that they felt was better suited.
No.
My feedback for all recruiters is that you should be able to provide evidence of incapability to every single candidate that doesn't get the job. So that's something that they didn't say, something that they didn't give enough detail on, something that they did. Ideally, you want at least 3 examples of those to show a pattern. So it's really hard to provide evidence of incapability on culture fit, because
100%.
I can't do anything with that as a candidate. I can't develop that. I can't work on it. You know, it's not constructive feedback. And I think
it's terrible
businesses
feedback.
need to be mindful of, you know, the candidate UX. Whether or not that candidate was right for your job, they are formulating opinions about your business, and you would want an advocate for you in the marketplace, as opposed to one where, you know, they felt a little bit shortchanged.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I also think, because we had to, I had to cancel a client because I had sent somebody to an interview. She did a phenomenal interview. Like, she was literally like blew it out of the park. And the interviewer told her that, and then someone above her nixed it, and so they had organized the next stage, and then they came back and just said not a fit. And I just thought, what I think about when I do it, and I think this is more, I mean, like, maybe all recruiters think this, maybe they don't, maybe they should. I know what it's like to be looking for a job. And you know, when you're telling your family, oh, I have it, it's at 12 o'clock on Thursday, and you're picking out your outfit, and you're talking to your friends, and you're doing your research, and like looking on like all the things that you're supposed to be doing, and knowing the job spec and knowing your CV, and putting not just the hour that you've assigned to the interview, but like time and energy and traveling, and, you know, trying to do this then as well in a global pandemic. And then for some donkey to come back and say, do you know what I mean? And just to be so dismissive, because like, obviously not everybody's going to get the job. I mean, like, if I send 3 people to an interview, only one of them is going to get it. So really, recruitment's about, like, you know, giving bad news sometimes, or taking the feedback and then turning it into a positive for the next one.
There needs to be feedback.
But that's the thing. So like, what am I supposed to do with that? She's put like hours of her life into it, and I have to go back with not a cultural fit, you know. And I just thought, no, it's not good enough. I can't in good conscience send another candidate to you
but in my experience, and this is just circling back to the education piece, in my experience, whenever I probe on what people mean by culture fit, whether it's rejecting a candidate or, you know, they want a candidate, they're not entirely sure. They're relying a lot on gut feel. You know, they just don't know, or they do know, but to say it out loud sounds really bad, and it's just, you know, I can't actually say that, so it's just culture fit, and that's what it is, and it's a justifiable reason, and it is, but you do need to provide explanation. And I think some of the things that I talk about in the education piece is having a devil's advocate within the recruitment process. So whether or not you want to reject someone or you want to progress them, having someone who challenges that decision and goes, well, why do you think that? Like, literally, you have to justify it internally to me why you've arrived at that decision, just to sanity check it. And, you know, you can tell, and I've done this in businesses before, where you can tell when a manager's really fighting, and I'm going, I don't believe you. I think you want to hire her because you think she's pretty. No, she's got this. And I'm like,
yeah, let them sell it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can tell. And you can tell the times where they go, oh, actually, like
maybe you're right.
You're actually, I don't know why I think it. And it might
maybe they're under pressure to hire as well. So
so it might just be that you need to maybe have another phone call, because I'm asking you questions you don't know the answer to. So maybe you've kind of thought you had everything you needed to make a decision, and you don't actually have all the information.
And Mel has just gone and poked holes in all of it. And then also, I mean, like, I think it's important to touch on, and you had mentioned it earlier, that like, okay, there's cultural fit, which is fine, but in the behavioral questions, if you are looking at the job spec and the hire that you want, and we had spoken about this before, that you can put questions in relation to the attributes that the person needs. So whether it's like, you know, the growth mindset, and like, would you agree with that?
Totally, absolutely. There are certain things that are just going to really help. Like you say, that the growth mindset is indicative of how that person will be managed, how they will, you know, what kind of how they're going to respond to development and training within the business, and feedback. Are they going to take it on board, or are they going to come in and go, this is how I've done it for 5 years, leave me alone? which again is in some instances
Yeah.
is fine if that's what you're looking for. But I think defining this criteria, and then like step one is, what is the criteria, right?
Yeah.
Step two is, how are we going to assess that in a way that's fair, that we can actually evidence and provide a good level of feedback. Like, we will know at the end of this process if this person is right. And like, if you're going in just going, oh well, I'll know when I see them,
What does that even mean?
we've kind of fallen at the first hurdle. And
Yeah.
going back to my point about being the bottleneck, let's say you are the CEO and you're just great, and actually you do pick winners, you do know them when you see them. Excellent. How are you gonna quality control that across all of your business? Like, my version of a 10 out of 10 is maybe not the same as yours, is maybe not the same as the next person. So how are we going to
Standardize,
create a culture? If, you know, we've talked a lot about culture, but like, if we can't even agree on what good looks like, then we're going to have wild variation within our business, not just in terms of the performance and the capabilities, but in terms of what is acceptable, what's appropriate, and what it is to be part of your organization. So we've got to be really clear from the off, like, set your stall out. This is what good looks like, and this is what we're after.
I love it. I feel like I should be taking notes all the way through this. One of the things that I wanted, what I would do when I'm hiring, I always try and look at like because I believe in diversity of thought as well. And I'd love your opinion on this. Like, I always try and look at it from the perspective, or encourage my clients to look at it. Like, what can this person bring you? Like, if you look at it as, you know, a kaleidoscope, and like, you know, it's looking out onto business and things, I feel like that if you hire, not just for diversity, but if you get like somebody from a different background, a different socioeconomic background, whatever, they're going to see things that you may not have seen. Like, is that something you would encourage companies to do?
I absolutely would. I saw something, it was at the CIPD conference a couple of years ago, and it stuck with me. I wish I could remember who the talk was, because I would credit it, because it really stuck with me. And it was basically this concept that your job as a leader is to create a 10 out of 10 team. There's no such thing as a 10 out of 10 person. So let's say that the most a person can be is 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10. If all you do is hire your 8 out of 10 and go, yeah, that's the best a person can be, we've got the best people, you'll only ever be an 8 out of 10 team. So even if you took a 6 out of 10, but it was a completely different skill set, because those, you know, those 2 points that they've dropped between the 6 and an 8 was building something that just wasn't even on our radar. Bringing that person into the team strengthens it, because they're going to bring expertise that the 8s don't have. The 8s are going to upskill the 6, and then before you know it, you're stronger. And I was just like, why are we not thinking like this? Yeah. We should all be thinking, who is not at the table, and not in a tokenistic, we need a Noah's Ark list of every single possible characteristic. But in terms of things like your worldview, you know, I went to a meetup recently, and it was women in business, and they were like, look how diverse we are. And I'm like, what? Like, every person here has a degree, we've all got internet connection, like my nana would feel lost on this. Like, we are not diverse. And it goes back to that privilege is blind thing that we were talking about earlier on. And this is why I hate thinking about it in a box ticking way, because it's bigger than race, it's bigger than gender, we just need a people-centered approach where we think about, okay, so what strengths do we have, and like, let's think about how do we make this business stronger.
I love it. I love that, because I've actually had that conversation as well before. I was talking to the chief of diversity at a company, I won't mention them, and we were at an event, and all of these people said to me, can you take a picture? And I was like, oh, and they were the heads of diversity for companies in Ireland, and they were all women, which is lovely to see, but they all look the same. And I just thought, like, are you really going to put like the label on LinkedIn and like it's, you know, every blonde?
That's it. I looked around this room, and there was like 7 people called Claire, with like blonde hair and stuff. And again, don't come for me, Claire's. I've nothing against Claire's or people
We're glad you were there.
But we just need to, as I say, rather than sticking your claim on this is the diversity that I care about, actually, if we just focus on building a more inclusive business which focuses less on, and I agree, people
quotas and things.
Yeah, people are terrified. Just a note on quotas. People are genuinely worried that, this is going to be the death of meritocracy. People, and very, rightfully so in some cases, are going, why aren't we just giving this job to the best person? Why are we talking about this? This is where the education comes in, because there are actually barriers that we don't even realise are there, because, again, privilege is blind. We don't have that lived experience. So by designing inclusive hiring processes and inclusive, thinking about what possible barriers for things like neurodiversity and divergent people, people who are single parents or whatever it might be, let's actually design that. And I use this analogy, if you mind the pennies, the pounds will watch themselves. If you build an inclusive business, the diversity will come. Don't worry about it.
I love that. And I love that it's not just because I spoke to David Scanlon, he's a venture capitalist. I'm sure he's not, but he's in that, they invest in startups, and it was this company called NDRC. So it was early stage startups. And he was saying that, because I was saying to him, I want him to talk to me about diversity. And, he's I'm a middle-aged white man who works with middle-aged white men. But what he could talk to me about was neurodiversity, and how he really loved to work with people who were across the whole spectrum of that. And that would have been where his experience was, because he was they could look at things in a way some people had seen it as a negative or whatever it would be, but for him, he could see the brilliance in it, especially in the startup mentality.
I wrote a piece for the CIPD about it, because quite often with neurodiversity, but with diversity in general, the response in businesses to how do we minimize this? How do we mitigate these differences so that what can we do? And I referenced in it, it's Leon Megginson, which is, it's not it's not survival of the fittest. It's not the strongest that survive. It's those that are adaptable to change. And if you have a homogenous business that has a single way of doing things in a view, something like COVID or something that we've not even considered yet can be the death of your business. So there's strength in diversity, and it's getting away from this idea that diversity is the characteristics that you see, and it's finding out actually what are the levels. I come from a very non-traditional background, for instance, so what are the levels of diversity that we can focus on? And when you think about it, you go, God, this is so massive. This is where issues like intersectionality come in. How do you separate all of these things out? And this is where you find that people will actually then start doing things that are just the right thing to do, that just make everyone's life easier, even the straight white middle-aged men. It makes their life a lot easier. It's not just for the underrepresented groups. Quite often this is just benefiting everybody to be able to work in ways which work for them.
I think that's so interesting that people do think that I'm working with this company at the moment, and they're making a hire, but they're hiring somebody who has an intellectual disability. And they were chatting to me saying, so what do we need to change? And I was all you really need to do is instead of hot desking, give them a desk that they go to every single morning, because obviously they need this person, not obviously, this person needs routine. And you'll have to dim the lights, so you'll have to change the light bulbs in the whole the building. And they're is that it? I'm yeah, that's and I remember working in a previous company, and they had these really glary lights, and if you had come in and told me that they were going to lower the wattage, I would have paid for it myself. This is only going to benefit everybody who works there, and because you have the glare from your screen and all of this good stuff. And that was it. And the company thought they were willing to go further, of course, but for them, like they were like, is that like it? That's the reasonable accommodations, and we get this amazing person. And I'm like, that's it. Yeah.
That's one of the things that I talk to businesses about, is like, if you build this into your job spec processes, into your candidate registration processes, and actually ask these questions, like it goes back to this being seen as this really big scary topic that we're not allowed to talk about, and don't ask because are we allowed to say that, like, you know, this thing. But we're there's a lot more in common than you think. And as I say, you know, I really feel, not least because, you know, my lens into the white straight male gaze is my partner, and you know, I completely get this feeling that is going around at the moment, which is, you know, I feel like I should be doing loads and there's more to do, but I'm terrified of doing or asking, or, you know, you don't want to patronize somebody by assuming they need help if they don't need help. And so just having conversations about this and sharing, like, visibility, people who then go, oh, I get it now, you know.
Yeah, it's a different perspective. Like, and what you were saying there about the poor white cisgender males. I was talking to my uncle the last day we went for a walk, and we were talking about the lady who had been killed in, is it Brixton?
Yeah.
And Sarah Everard, was it?
Sarah Everard, yeah.
Yeah, and my uncle was saying that one night he had seen a girl walking down the road, and there was two guys. He was out for his walk, I think, and no, he was in his car, and he saw two guys like walking on the other side of the street, and then when they saw her, they walked over to walk behind her, right? So he knew, like, obviously, you know, like, in his gut, but then he was thinking, if I pull over beside her, am I actually making her more nervous, you know, than that? So he had to pull up, like he was saying, a significant amount in front of her. So he left the car door open and was standing at it to say, have you far to go? Because, you know, there's people walking behind you. And she said, no, I'm just popping in here, thanks a million. But his first thing was really conscious of, I don't want to frighten her more, or I don't want to do this. And he said it was the same, because we were talking in relation to this, you know, that, like, he was like, you know, there's so many great men, you know, that want to be protectors or want to be this and that. And he said he remembered seeing a child that was lost in a shopping center and wanted to go and help, but then was like, do I grab the child, or do I? So he went and got the security person and was just like, oh, look, this kid is lost, but didn't really go pick them up.
And we need to talk about this more, because it can feel probably sometimes that you can't do right for doing wrong. I remember my partner telling me when he was working at bank in tech, I will not name the bank, but he was working you know, within their tech team on apps, and there was an unbelievably talented female developer who was just getting overlooked for opportunities. So he was like, I'm going to advocate. I've seen this. So I use my voice and my privilege, and I'm going to advocate on their behalf, and I'm going to speak up and stuff. The next thing, there were rumours of, like, oh, you're just trying to sleep with her. And he's like, that's not
ridiculous,
on. And then she got a little bit upset because she's like, you know, I don't need you to fight my battles, actually. Like, you know, and why do you feel you don't advocate for anybody else? And so he then tried to explain it's because he believed in her, but then it turned into this big thing. And it's one of the reasons he's part of a lot of women in tech groups, just because from his perspective, he's like, I want to pick people's brains and hear their thoughts and ideas. And I know you know, he knows he's not a woman in tech, but he is like, this is not your problem, and I want to learn about it. And fair play to him, because I know lots of people go, you know, well, I don't know what I'm going to add to this by getting involved. And I think sometimes there are obviously factors that are internal limiting factors, but there are things that can, like we were talking about before with diversity and inclusion, just giving people the confidence to know, you know, what do I do and how do I go about this in the right way? Because, you know, I saw one of the things that I thought was incredibly unfair was one of the things I saw during, like, Black Lives Matter was, you know, silence is violence, and, you know, you're, like, complicit. And I thought, well, that's a great little soundbite, but actually in my experience, silence and inaction don't come from people condoning,
or not caring.
If someone's on a bus getting racially abused, I don't think the people who are sat in silence are like, yeah, good. They're sort of sat there mortified, and just, in my experience, that inaction comes from a lack of confidence or
paralysis almost as well,
and
because it's a violent act.
about like what are the repercussions going to be for me? How is this person going to take it? Are they going to kick off? All of those things. So I think it's unfair to expect everyone to be, the hero without actually, we have to, again, listen to and appreciate that that's a really scary thing to be doing. And if no one's actually ever been given those tools, we can all say in the comfort of our living rooms, oh, I'd have done this and I'd have said that. But the reality there's medical students, for example. So the medical schools that just do all of the theory up front and then all of the clinical experience at the end have a far higher dropout in that first year post qualification, because they know the theory, but when you're in A&E on a Saturday night or New Year's Eve and there's blood and everyone's shouting at you and it's overwhelming, they go, I can't deal with this. Like the emotion, it's busy, but when you live those shifts day in, day out, like you can't pretend that you're not feeling what you're feeling. So going back to sort of the behavioural science again, it's understanding that actually those feelings are there to keep us safe. I'm not saying they're right or they're wrong, but they're valid. So how do we get to a point where people can feel a little bit more confident in those situations? Like that's the bit that's not being talked about. And until we solve that problem, nothing's really going to change, because people will either be frightened to be cancelled or frightened to, have backlash. And that's not a bad, I know there are lots of people who go, well, that's not good enough reason, they should just do the right thing anyway. But let's be realistic about the reasons why people aren't necessarily clapping their hands and diving into arguments left and right on LinkedIn and Facebook,
And then it's also, sometimes people are like, is it my place? Like, can I get involved in this? And anything that's ever happened or any progress that we've ever made, I think, I don't want to make a sweeping statement, but if you look at civil rights, or if you look at marriage equality in Ireland, if it was the minority who were only responsible, say, for voting in the marriage equality referendum, it wouldn't have passed. So it took a collaborative, and a collective effort for the people of Ireland to vote in these equal marriage rights, and that was done by allies who listened. But that was like a long conversation. Like that, that was very different in the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. But I think the leaders of the LGBTQ community kept the conversation going and took the fear out of it. And if they had it given up, I don't think marriage equality would have passed, but there was a patience and a perseverance on their part that changed the conversation.
And the moral of that story is we have to welcome the allies, right? Like it's not an us and them kind of deal. Like we need everybody on board. And so, like I say, I get the emotions, they're valid, but we've got to make this so that everybody feels as though they can be part of it, that they are welcome, that we need as many people as possible involved in the conversation, so that it feels more natural and safe, and that there are people who, we've talked about representation matters. It really does. Representation matters on the other side as well, so that there are people like you who are going, are you scared? Yeah, I'm scared. Does this happen to you? Yeah, I feel this way as well. Like, it's important.
No, 100%. And you know what? Like, you've just finished this podcast on such a positive note, and talking about representation and perspective. Like, I know that you were saying that, you're like such a mix of different things, different experiences, different backgrounds and things. And I think the fact that you can put all of that into what you're doing now is beautiful, because it's like a safe place, and you are creating a safe place for people to ask questions, and you can see it from different perspectives. So I know that everything that you're doing is just going to blow up and be amazing, and I will cheer you on your journey. You should be so proud of yourself.
Thank you so much. You're going to make me cry. Thank you so much.
No, it's so true. It's so true. Listen,
it's a joy. It's when you're doing something that it's sort of, you've got this Venn diagram, right? It's like stuff you're good at, and then stuff you're interested in or you're passionate about, and then this third one is like stuff the world needs, and then in the middle
it's called Ikigai. I did a blog on it actually the last day, and it's about like finding your reason for being. So Iki is like life, and Gai I think is being. And if you find so your vocation, your mission, your profession, it's like all of those different things, and then your Ikigai, your reason to be, is in the middle. But you can see it because you literally just radiate it. Like, you have so much energy when it comes to it. And I think that people are more and more going to be coming to you as a thought leader on this, and I will be singing your praises. I think you did amazingly. No, really, I'd love to have you back on, and maybe like with a panel and a couple of other people that we could talk to some businesses at different levels and like work out how we could help them. But you have been a joy, and I know that I'm going to get so many comments on this. Like, they're going to be just like, where's Mel and how do we get her? And I will share all the relevant information. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.